Nothing surprised me more than Josh Hoover playing like that on Saturday, and TCU still coming out with the victory. Oh yeah, it's Locked On Horned Frogs. Play my music.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? I'm Darrion Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, host of your favorite, #1, daily one-stop shop for everything TCU athletics, Monday through Friday, but you know it better as the Locked On Horned Frogs podcast. Thank you for going on this journey with us and making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the country. We close out today's episode by taking a look at TCU flipping the script, which sounds amazing. It does. And it was until it wasn't. But TCU had a season-defining win, had a roster-defining win over Houston. And that's exactly how Sonny Dykes broke it down. And I kind of agree with his assessment. But this whole thing kicks off the same way that TCU kicks off every single game with Josh Hoover. That is the focus of every game for the Horned Frogs. It is the focus of today's episode on Locked On Horned Frogs, because I do not believe that Josh Hoover was good on Saturday. And I don't think that TCU wins if this happens 10 times. I don't think that TCU wins 9 of them. But you only need one. You only need one of those victories, and they got it on Saturday versus 23 ranked Houston. And honestly, we'll get to this at the end of the segment, but I'm proud of the team for winning despite Hoover not really playing well. That's how I feel. And I wanted to go check the box score to see if the box score backed up what I felt. He ends the game with 293 yards. He has 2 touchdowns. And he has 3 interceptions. Now, if you take out those 3 interceptions, and Sonny Dykes talked about this at halftime. I think, it was halftime, where he was like, hey, I think that Hoover's playing well if you take out those interceptions. The problem is you can't actually take out those interceptions. The problem is that's actually how we need to analyze his game. I'm going to attempt to tell you how this game went with 2 numbers, 2 and 3, because this game was reminiscent of the Arizona State game to me, in which you had a really hot start. Josh Hoover came out blazing, and then it tapered off. Now, you'll think about the Arizona State game, and your mind will instantly go to, well, he did have that interception and that fumble at the end of the game that cost him. It wasn't that bad here, so how can you compare the two? It wasn't that bad, but Hoover still had 3 interceptions. Instead of having 2 turnovers at the end that give Arizona State the lead, allow them to come up with the victory, you have 3 interceptions that really stall out your momentum and allow Houston to come back and make this a close game again. Those 2 touchdowns, they were beautiful. The dot to Eric McAllister was amazing. I don't know what that cornerback was doing, because how are you that flat-footed when you have Eric McAllister, who you know will run right by you? How do you do that? I don't know. But TCU was the benefactor of what I thought was questionable technique. Hoover's throw to Jordan Dwyer in the back of the end zone was probably the best throw that I can remember from him in quite a while. It was the best touchdown I can remember from him all season. This is a tight window where you're right against the back edge of the end zone. You have a defender who is face guarding essentially, but no, let me not say face guarding, but they're face to face. They're having great defense. Face guarding means, is typically associated with bad defense, but you have good defense by the corner, good coverage by the corner, but it was just a better throw. It was just great concentration. No ifs, ands, or but about it. This was a phenomenal pitch and catch by both members, by both parties, and it resulted in a 14-0 lead by TCU. That was the 2 touchdowns. The 2 touchdowns were great throws. And at that first quarter, Hoover was wheeling and dealing. Hoover was absolutely on fire. And then, like the Arizona State game, it tapered off. The offense went cold. Hoover went cold. But this time, I don't point to the fourth quarter. I point to the second quarter. I point to the 2 interceptions that you had on back-to-back drives. I point to the decisions that you made, because you're up 14-0. You rolling. You're up and you're right there. You're near midfield. You force a ball to to Eric McAllister. Josh Hoover forces a ball to Eric McAllister. He didn't try to give his guy a shot. He forced that ball. Was he also trying to do that? Yes. But a lot of times people say, oh, he's just trying to give his guy a shot. That excuses a poor decision. And I'm always pro give your guy a shot, right? I grow up Saints fan. We used to make fun of Matt Ryan. F it. Julio Jones over there somewhere. But then you begin to realize you're throwing 50-50 balls. That's all that really was when you take the fandom out of it. This was not a 50-50 ball. This was an Eric McAllister that was absolutely smothered in coverage. This was an Eric McAllister who, did I think it was going to be an interception? No, but I didn't think that McAllister had the only I could get it type of throw. That's what it required from Hoover, and Hoover didn't deliver that. So that was a bad decision. That was a bad throw, and it was able to be intercepted by Will James, who wasn't done on the night. Then you come back the next drive. Once again, you force it to Hoover. I think I saw a stat that at that point, the last 4 interceptions that Josh Hoover was throwing were in the direction of Eric McAllister, which is, I mean, it's a Snapple fact, but it is a absolutely useless statistic because you're not going to stop throwing the ball to Eric McAllister. But it is something to notice. It is something that tells me, oh, maybe you're forcing the ball to McAllister a little bit. But who's really going to complain about that? Who's really going to complain that they're forcing the ball to to Eric McAllister? But I did feel like that's what happened on the first one. The second one, I thought he was bracketed. Maybe he didn't think that underneath defender was going to drift back enough to get a hand on the ball, but he did. And that top defender was able to have a miraculous interception. It really was a crazy play. All of Josh Hoover's interceptions were, the first 2 interceptions were kind of like, didn't see that coming. The third interception, though, we completely saw that coming. The third interception, you got read all the way through. Will James, once again, there was no I'm reaching back to get this guy. It was I'm in coverage. I see where you're about to go. I'm breaking on the ball, and I picked it off. And I watched. I don't know why I was watching the cornerback right then, but I was watching the cornerback from the moment it was snapped. I was watching the cornerback before it was even snapped. This is on the live broadcast. And when he broke, I felt it. When he broke, I said, that's not a pass breakup. That's an interception. And it happened. And at the end of the day, you can talk about the 2 touchdowns. And I think that they were impressive throws. But the 3 interceptions were bad decisions. They were Josh Hoover being read. They were Josh Hoover forcing the ball. Now, I can say the second one, he had a little bit of pressure in his face. But I would like for him to deal with that better. I would like a quarterback who I speak about in the way that I speak about Josh Hoover. I would like a quarterback who is on the caliber of Josh Hoover to deal with that pressure a little bit better. It was as he was throwing the ball. Maybe he could have seen Jordan Dwyer, who was open. At this point, you're past midfield. I just felt like you were doing a lot for a team that was up 14-0. There was a certain amount of pressing that it felt like, especially that first interception required, that felt like TCU was down 14-0 instead of up 14-0. It felt like they were just coming off of a Houston touchdown drive as opposed to a touchdown drive of their own. It felt like there was just too many things going on, that too many aspects that didn't feel indicative of where the game was, and maybe too many things going on in Josh Hoover's brain where he just felt like, I got to put the dagger. I got to put 21-0. That's the dagger. I got it. That's what it felt like. It just felt like someone who was pressing way too much in that game. When I say that Hoover didn't play well, you didn't bounce back from those turnovers. You just didn't turn the ball over again, but you didn't bounce back from those turnovers. And you were giving points away. That's the thing. Houston was down 14-0. It felt like Houston was about to get ran away from on senior night. And then Josh Hoover threw an interception. And that put them in solid field position where you're about the 40-yard line that you're starting if you're Houston. That's good. That's good field position. You drove down 60 some odd yards, scored a touchdown. I'm not here to tell you that Josh Hoover didn't do anything. I'm here to tell you that he didn't play up to his standard. He did not play well. And he played in a game that, to me, really reflected back to Arizona State. And it was everything I was frustrated with him about. But like I said, that happens 10 times. You're losing 9. It just takes 1. And Jeremy Payne, his 100-yard game was a big reason why. The offensive line opening up drives, opening up holes was a big reason why. You know what? Instead of giving you all the reasons on why this is a big deal, on one of the reasons on why I think this is exciting, let's actually transition into the next segment in which we'll talk about how Sonny Dykes feels like this tells you exactly who the team is. In the way they responded to Josh Hoover's interceptions, I actually think that Dykes has a point. So let's move forward and talk about this as we continue with Locked On Horned Frogs. Today's episode is brought to you by Wayfair, and the holiday season is right around the corner. That means it's time for you to bring and get your home ready. Maybe you're hosting a Christmas party, maybe a Christmas sweater party. Whether you need more seating for guests or cozy new linens, or maybe just fun serveware for your holiday hosting, Wayfair's Black Friday sale is here to help you make your space shine. What's the best part? Is that you don't have to wait for Wayfair, which means you don't have to wait. Wayfair's Black Friday deals are happening all month. That means all the way to December 1st, things are up to 70% off. Listen, I recently upgraded my bedroom. Wayfair was perfect for me. It will be perfect for you. Browsing through their site, it's easy to find pieces that actually fit your style. Nothing generic, just quality designs that feel personal. Don't miss out on early Black Friday deals. Head to wayfair.com to shop Wayfair's Black Friday sale for up to 70% off. That's WAYFAIR.com. Sale ends December 7th. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day. Every day, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. I want to continue where we were going at the end of not the end of yesterday, the end of last segment. It wasn't yesterday, but at the end of last segment, I took a look at why I was encouraged by how they responded to Josh Hoover's struggles. I was encouraged by the fact that 9 out of 10 games that this happens, you're losing, but we saw that 1 out of 10 on Saturday, and that's because of how they responded. TCU's win over Houston is a defining victory because it showed the Frogs' ability to respond. It showed their ability to bounce back. Adversity right in their face. And a lot of people aren't happy about this win, and I understand. I genuinely do. But the whole bounce back from adversity, the way that you respond are things that coaches eat up. They love that because it shows the mental makeup of a team. Fans, on the other hand, they want to bounce back. But the problem is a lot of the positivity in bouncing back comes from things that you have to bounce back from within the game. That's what I think the issue truly is. The issue isn't, well, you got beat bad by BYU. Now you're coming up against UH. What are you going to do? It's the fact that you have 4 turnovers versus Houston. That's why it doesn't feel good, because you did a lot of things wrong too. When I want you and I encourage you to be positive, I'm not asking you to ignore the negative. Let's be clear. Positivity and negativity can exist in the same space at the same time. It doesn't have to be, if you're positive, you don't think anything negative happened. It doesn't have to be, if you're negative, you don't think anything positive happened. I think there were good things in this game, but there was also a lot of bad. The best things came from how you responded. Josh Hoover was not on his A game. He was on his B game for sure, probably his B- game. He had 3 interceptions. They never win like that. There's a couple of stats from TCU's game notes to really break down and drive home what I felt like was an issue. He says, or excuse me, the notes say, TCU won a game where they threw 3 or more interceptions for the first time since 2018. Secured a win for the first time it's the first time TCU has won a game where they threw 3 or more interceptions while securing just 1 or fewer since the 17-7 win over Tulsa in 98. Like, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about things that haven't happened in almost 3 decades. Almost 3 decades. Because it's not like you won the turnover battle. It's not like you forced a bunch. You forced 1 turnover, and you had 4 of them. So you lost the turnover battle by a wide margin, but you were able to respond accordingly. And one of those, the lone interception you had, came off of a sudden change. Houston's driving down the field. They're right there on the end zone. They had 4th down. So you've already stopped them 3 times, and they go for it, and you get an interception. I thought the defense constantly had their back against the wall. The defense consistently bounced back from what was a terrible game last week. That was a terrible game that TCU's defense had a week ago against BYU. BYU sliced them up through the air. They sliced them up with a quarterback run. They sliced him up with LJ Martin as the running back. They did it all. And you needed a bounce back from them. I didn't know what it would look like, but I thought that they played well. They had some bend but don't break moments. They had some straight stall you out moments. They had everything you could possibly ask for. So the defense did bounce back. The defense responded to adversity. The team responded to adversity. Sonny Dykes said, called it junk, called it noise. And I think that in the locker room, the things that people say, especially when it's negative, should sound like junk. And I stand with Josh Hoover. I stand with Sonny Dykes in what he said, because to me, this was the first time I felt like the team was getting heavily criticized. Now, was Dykes a big part of that? 1,000%. But at the same time, players got a little shot too. But you saw the defense bounce back. You saw how people played well around Hoover. Josh Hoover had 3 interceptions, and Jeremy Payne had 100 yards. Had 100 yards through the ground or on the ground. You don't expect somebody not named Kavorian Barnes to do that. And if it is, you probably thought it'd be Trent Battle. You don't expect the offensive line to have their best game of the season. Let me take a look at these PFF grades for you, because this is actually insane. Josh Hoover had the 7th best grade. So that's not great, not terrible, but not great. 68.4. Ben Taylor Whitfield, left tackle, higher than Josh Hoover. Cooper Powers, right guard, higher than Josh Hoover. He had a really good run blocking grade too. He was almost in the 70s. I think that might have been the highest of anybody all year, it feels like, since I've been paying attention. Carson Bruno, right tackle, higher than Josh Hoover. Colton Deary is just one right behind him at center, and it's only that's about a 2-point difference. So that's decent. But what you're seeing is that the right guard, right tackle, and left tackle all played better than Josh Hoover. And I don't know if that's ever been the case. The quarterback has not only been one of the better players on the team, but he's also the offensive line has also been some of the worst players. So that was very encouraging. Jeremy Payne on PFF had the highest grade at 81 even. This was such a monumental victory. I say it's a defining game for the season just because of what I feel like it does for Sonny Dykes. It gives him his first ranked opponent to knock off, or his first ranked win since his first year. He hasn't had a ranked win since. So this was something that I feel like also plays to some of the things I've talked about with him. But yeah, they fought back from turnovers, had points allowed on some of those turnovers. Defense bounced back in general. Team has been getting killed for a couple of weeks. They showed the ability to not give up. We talked about a little bit of desperation. Parker and I, we talked about that. That was really fun. I don't know if they came out desperate, but they came out much hotter than most probably expected them to. So let's take a look at what has been, to me, defining, because response. Teams love response. I just want to make sure I hammered that home. I don't know if I was clear about that. Teams love response. And for them to show a response the way that they did, to me, that was the mental makeup. That was the mental strength. So that's why I say good description by Sonny Dykes. But now let's move forward, because they flipped the script. TCU absolutely flipped the script. I just don't necessarily like that they did. I just wish they would have changed altogether. Let's get into that as we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time, and download the Game Time app right now, today. I'm talking about as you're listening to me, because if you're on YouTube, you can swipe up and I'll still play. If you're on audio, well, you can do whatever you want on your phone on audio. You knew that already. But one thing you probably didn't know is that Game Time secures you the best prices, because I'm sure if you knew that already, you would be buying there. Game Time has, I think, $25 tickets for the final home game against Cincinnati. If you have a ticket need, they're going to provide it for you. If you have a monster truck jam you want to go to, a circus you want to go to, what else do they do? A football game, NFL pro or collegiate NCAA. If you want to go to a basketball game, pro with the NBA, collegiate, once again, like you can do whatever you want. You can have whatever you like. Yeah. All you have to do is go to Game Time, download the app, and get $20 off your first purchase when you use the code Locked On College. As we continue rolling and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Horned Frogs, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. We've talked about the ability to respond. We talked about how Josh Hoover did not play up to par, but TCU was able to surround him with quality pieces. TCU absolutely flipped the script on Saturday, and that sounds great. And it was great until it wasn't, until it was abysmal. Because listen, TCU scored 14 points in the first quarter, something they haven't done since playing SMU. That was great. The biggest gripe we had about them all year is the way that they start games, whether it's getting a field goal, whether it's just they haven't scored many points in the first quarter in the last month and a half. This is already more than they scored in the last month and a half combined. They had 10 points versus West Virginia, and they had 0 points versus everybody else in the last 6 weeks. You come out and you have a 14-point first quarter. Everybody's feeling good. You have a 14-point first quarter. Everybody's feeling like you're on fire. I want to read some of the stats that you get from, that first quarter and then compare it to some of the other people. So in the first quarter, TCU had 176 total yards. They only rushed the ball 7 times for 4 yards, which means they had 172, I'm sorry. That's the average. I'm like, that don't sound right. They had 148 passing yards. They had 28 rushing yards. It was 4 per pop, not 4 in totality. But 148 passing yards. You had 2 touchdowns. You had 8 yards per play. Everything was firing on all cylinders. Then you get to the second half. You get to the second quarter, and it stalls. You have the interceptions. You have. It's at that point that you realize, oh, they started fast because they're not going to finish fast. You don't just want one, right? Like you want TCU to start fast. You want TCU to have a big time game. You want TCU to come in and perform admirably for 60 minutes. We've asked TCU to play a 60-minute game pretty much all year. And when they started fast against Houston, it felt like they had finally done it. I talked about this with Parker. The idea of what desperation would look like. The idea of wanting to save Sonny Dykes' job. We said that it would look like coming out and having a big first quarter. They did that. Unfortunately, it's like Space Jam. It was like Space Jam where you had all the powers in the first quarter. You had your 148 passing yards. You had your 28 rushing yards. You had your 2 touchdowns. You had your absolute dots from Josh Hoover. If you want it, you had it. I want it. I got it. It was easy, it almost felt like. And then when they touch that ball, all the powers are gone. When you touch that ball, you get to the second quarter and you have back-to-back interceptions. You have an interception of your own towards the end of the fourth quarter or second quarter. You're on their side of the field. Boom, fumble. It was exhausting. It was draining. It was the quarter that is typically TCU's. And it got snatched from them. And that to me is disappointing because you still have yet to see them play a full game. You still yet to see that. Because now instead of waiting until the second quarter, they got it in the first quarter. You still didn't do much in the third, still didn't do much in the fourth. I don't want to disrespect what Josh Hoover did in the first quarter because it allowed you to get to 17 points. It allowed you to get 14 off rip, and you only have to get a field goal late. But I still feel like he played poorly because those turnovers, the decisions, I thought that weighted the interceptions meant a little bit more. They just did. Maybe because they happened later. Maybe because they stalled out all the momentum. I can point to that and say, that was it. That was a moment where everything changed for TCU, where things didn't feel smooth. But the last thing I want to look at is the decision to go for it. I don't know how everybody else feels. I thought that the decision to go for it was the right call. I said this on the show. On Twitter. I said this on Twitter where kicking the field goal would have put you up 6 points. Going for it would have closed the game. What does TCU have to lose? What does TCU have to lose that they can't go for it on a 4th and short against Cincinnati, against a Houston, against a BYU? These are teams that you came in wanting to spoil their season. You didn't get that done with BYU. BYU went ahead and spoiled Cincinnati City or season for you on Saturday. But you did get a chance to do it against Houston. And that's exactly my mentality for those 3 games. That's the reason I did that. You are not playing to say, oh, man, go get a touchdown. No. If I don't get it, we'll keep you right here, deep in your own territory. You'll have the drive. And they did drive. But then the defense stood up. The defense bowed up because that's what they've been doing every single week. They've been timely this whole season. So I love Sonny Dykes' aggressiveness. I love Kendall Browse's aggressiveness. It didn't work, but I'm okay with that. There are certain decisions that I think are just the right decision, no matter what, right? It may not work, but I made the right call. That's how I feel about this decision to go for it on 4th down. Because once again, what is it that you're losing? What is it that you're gaining? All these decisions should be a risk versus reward. They should be a win versus loss. What happens? And I'm sure that the numbers just said go for it, and those are the statistics and whatnot. Analytics. But the eye test and simple football knowledge says you have a chance to put a game away, and you're deep in opponent's territory. Go put the game away. Go put the game away. And you have Josh Hoover, who you trust. Didn't get it, though, and that's okay. So I just want to say that. I think it was the right call. Wanted to talk about how they flipped the script. You still got the win. Top 25 games on the road are supposed to be tough. I think that if you don't lose to Iowa State, if you don't get beat up by Kansas State, and you lose to BYU and Arizona State in the same way, right? So Arizona State still comes back on you, but you don't lose another game till you get to BYU. It feels different. It does. The gritty win feels different. The ugly win feels different. Because when you have consistently disappointed your fans, the ugly is the focal point, not the win. So I do think that the way some of the games they lost definitely plays a part. But we'll be back on Wednesday because we're not going to do a Tuesday episode. We're not going to do a Thursday episode. We'll be back on Wednesday with Sarah Smith to break down her stat of the week, as well as does this save Sonny Dykes' job? Ooh, it's an interesting conversation. I can't wait for you to hear it. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.